Hello, this lesson goes into a little bit of detail about all the transaction codes related to capital asset transactions. You're probably familiar with the Schedule D and then the Form 8949 and Box A and Box D and Box E and what's that all about. So this lesson will go into a little bit about the history behind that and then try and summarize what it all means. I do want to digress a little bit and tell you a little bit about why this is so complicated. So before 2011, the Schedule D to report capital gains and losses was fairly straightforward. There was a Part 1 for short term and a Part 2 for long term. Um, and brokers reported only the sales price, the proceeds, to the IRS. So I guess somebody in Congress or the IRS didn't trust all the American taxpayers, because how do they know they were reporting the right cost basis if it wasn't reported to the IRS? And therefore, perhaps they were understating their gain or overstating their losses. So, starting in 2011, brokers were required to report the cost basis along with the sales proceeds. But nothing is simple. They didn't have to do it all at once. It was phased in over a few years. So starting January 1st, 2011, individual stocks that were acquired after that date and then subsequently sold were covered by the new law. And therefore, when they were sold, the cost basis had to be reported to the IRS. So if you had an individual stock that you had bought before January 1st, 2011, not covered by the law, broker doesn't have to report it to the IRS. Then January 1st, 2012, they covered mutual funds. So again, if a fund was bought after that date and then shares in it were subsequently sold, you had to report the cost basis. If you got the mutual fund before then, you didn't have to report it. And then 2 years later, January 1st, 2014, they covered individual bonds that were issued, primarily like municipal bonds, assuming that those bonds had fixed yields and maturity dates. So they also had to then create a new form, 8949, because now we have all sorts of transactions. We have short-term covered, short-term not covered, long-term covered, long-term not covered. And so there are actually 6 different Form 8949 that can be possible on an individual tax return. That's very rare. Each of those get added up and the totals show on the Schedule D. Let's go into that again. A 1099-B, you're going to have different box transactions or categories. The boxes refer to Schedule or Form 8949. We normally see codes A, D, and E. Short-term cost basis reported. I don't know that we're ever going to see a B anymore, because by the nature of a short term, it's the asset that was sold would have been acquired well after the date that assets were covered. We do see D and E quite often. If the broker doesn't know the holding period, it won't have a code, or it might have a code X. That's very rare. That would happen if a taxpayer transferred assets from one broker to another and none of the acquisition data transferred with it. A couple of other rare cost bases. If an asset was sold, but a 1099-B was not received or issued, then it would be categorized as C or F. Again, that very rarely happens. This chart just shows a summary by short or long term or unknown term. and then covered, not covered. So this is just a summary chart. If you'd like to print it out, if you need more information or need to remind yourself about it. And again, talk to them if you have any questions or comments. If you're watching this during training, you can ask the trainer any questions or provide any comments.